They came as heroes armed with the world's most advanced weapons, trained for victory. But in the jungles of Vietnam, victory never came. What began as a mission to stop communism ended as a nightmare that broke the world's most powerful army. This is the story of how America, for the first time, met a war it could not win.
In the humid jungles of Southeast Asia, the world's most powerful army came face to face with something it had never encountered before, a war it couldn't understand and couldn't win. To America, Vietnam was just another battlefield in the global fight against communism. But for the Vietnamese, it was a fight for survival, a fight for freedom on their own soil. What followed would scar two nations, divide a generation, and redefine what it meant to lose. After World War II, a new conflict began, the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union didn't fight directly, but through proxy wars, and Vietnam soon became one of the deadliest of them all. The French had colonized Vietnam for nearly a century, but in 1954, they suffered a humiliating defeat at Dien Bien Phu, crushed by communist-led Vietnamese forces under Ho Chi Minh. Vietnam was divided in two, the Communist North and the US-backed South. America feared the domino effect, the idea that if one Asian country fell to communism, others would follow. So they stepped in, determined to keep the South free and stop the spread of communism at any cost. But in trying to save Vietnam, America would slowly destroy it. What began as a small advisory mission quickly escalated. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson sent the first combat troops to Vietnam. They arrived confident, trained, armed, and certain of victory. After all, the US had the most advanced military on Earth: helicopters, fighter jets, napalm, and artillery that could flatten villages in seconds. The North Vietnamese and their southern allies, the Viet Cong, had none of that. They wore sandals made from tires, carried rifles older than they were, and hid in tunnels stretching hundreds of miles beneath the earth. But what they lacked in technology, they made up for in strategy and willpower. The Americans fought a conventional war, capture territory, measure success in body counts. The Vietnamese fought a guerrilla war, hit fast, vanish faster, and bleed the enemy's morale. Every tree could hide a sniper. Every rice field could conceal a mine. The jungle itself became an enemy, hot, wet, crawling with leeches and fear. Soldiers never knew if the next step would be their last. The US tried to crush resistance with overwhelming force. Operation Rolling Thunder, launched in 1965, dropped more bombs on North Vietnam than were used in all of World War II. Villages were destroyed. Forests burned under chemical weapons like Agent Orange, meant to strip away the enemy's hiding places. But the more the bombs fell, the stronger the resistance grew. For every village destroyed, new recruits joined the Viet Cong. For every civilian death, hatred deepened. The US measured progress in numbers, death counts, captured weapons, enemy losses. But you cannot measure determination on a chart. You cannot bomb belief. The Viet Cong built tunnel networks with hospitals, kitchens, and entire command centers underground. They struck swiftly, ambushing convoys, assassinating collaborators, and disappearing before reinforcements arrived. American soldiers found themselves fighting ghosts. Even elite units like the Green Berets struggled to adapt. Frustration turned deadly. Suspicion of civilians led to massacres like My Lai, where hundreds of innocent villagers were killed. At that moment, the line between enemy and victim blurred, and the war began to lose its soul. By 1968, the war had dragged on for years with no end in sight. Then came the Tet Offensive, a surprise attack by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces during the Vietnamese New Year. Over 100 cities and military bases were attacked simultaneously. Although the US and South Vietnamese forces repelled the assault, the psychological impact was devastating. Americans watching from home saw something they had never seen before. Proof that the enemy was far stronger and more organized than the government had admitted. The illusion of progress shattered. Public support collapsed. College campuses erupted in protests. Mothers cried on television, holding pictures of sons who would never come home. For the first time, America realized it wasn't fighting for victory, it was fighting to avoid defeat. Inside Vietnam, morale also crumbled. Soldiers fought not for glory, but for survival. Many turned to drugs, music, or silence to escape the chaos. Helicopters became the only symbol of safety, the sound of rescue from an unwinnable war. Meanwhile, in the jungles, the Viet Cong continued to fight with the same simplicity they had started with: belief, endurance, and the will to outlast an empire. In 1969, President Richard Nixon introduced a plan called Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing American troops and training South Vietnamese forces to take over the fight. But years of reliance on U.S. support had weakened South Vietnam's military and leadership. Corruption was rampant. Morale was low. The North, on the other hand, was united, disciplined, and backed by Soviet and Chinese aid. As American troops left, so did America's hope. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, officially ending U.S. involvement. But the war was far from over. 2 years later, the North launched its final offensive. In April 1975, Saigon fell. U.S. helicopters lifted off the embassy rooftop, leaving behind desperate South Vietnamese citizens who clung to the landing gear, begging to escape. The images shocked the world, not of victory, but of defeat. For America, Vietnam had ended not with triumph, but with humiliation. Nearly 3 million Vietnamese had died, soldiers and civilians alike. Over 58,000 Americans never returned home. Many who did carried invisible wounds, PTSD, guilt, and questions that would never be answered. The jungles of Vietnam had claimed not just lives, but belief in invincibility. The Vietnam War was more than a clash of ideologies, it was a tragedy of misunderstanding. America believed it was defending freedom. Vietnam believed it was defending its homeland. Neither side truly understood the other, and between them lay a graveyard of dreams. The Vietnamese countryside was left poisoned by chemicals, scarred by bombs, and haunted by ghosts. In the US, returning veterans were met not with parades, but with silence or anger. They came home to a country that wanted to forget. But history never forgets. In the decades since, the Vietnam War has become a warning, a symbol of what happens when military might meets the will of a people who refuse to surrender. It showed the world that wars are not won by weapons alone, but by hearts, patience, and understanding. In the end, the United States left Vietnam not because it was defeated in battle, but because it lost the one thing no army can afford to lose: the purpose to fight. Vietnam stood bloodied but unbroken, proving that even the smallest nation can resist the strongest empire when its people fight for their land and freedom. The Vietnam War remains one of history's most painful reminders: power cannot conquer belief. And victory means nothing if it comes without understanding. This is Vietnam, the war America couldn't win. What do you think? Was this America's greatest mistake, or a war doomed from the very beginning? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful true war stories only on Arib's War.